Hey doc, does creatine actually cause hair loss? That's a question I see in the comments a lot. And I get it, because most of us at this age and stage, we've been paying attention to this for a long time. Some of you are thinning, some of you are holding steady, and some of us, like me, ultimately made an executive decision to stop negotiating, shave it all off, and just end the fight right there. But the creatine hair loss concerns didn't come out of nowhere. Somewhere along the way, this idea took off that creatine increases something called DHT, dihydrotestosterone. And DHT is linked to male pattern baldness. So people connect the dots and assume that creatine must be the problem. But here's the issue. For years, there really hasn't been good direct research looking at this, until just recently when a newer study published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition actually tried to put this to rest. And what they did was pretty solid. They took 45 healthy men, split them into two groups. They were all adept at resistance training. One group took 5 grams of creatine per day. The other group took a placebo, and they followed these groups for 12 weeks. Now, here's what they did. They didn't just look at blood work. They actually looked at hair using pretty detailed methods. Imaging of the scalp, hair density, follicle counts, even hair thickness. So this wasn't just a theoretical study. They were actually measuring the thing that people care about, hair loss. Now, let's talk about what they found, because this is interesting. There was no difference between the creatine group and the placebo group in DHT levels. And remember, DHT is the hormone that everyone is worried about. They also found no difference in testosterone, and most importantly, no difference in hair density, hair thickness, or follicle count. All essentially were unchanged. So if we're looking at this study in isolation, it pretty clearly argues against the idea that creatine actually causes hair loss. But this is where we have to slow down a bit, because one study is never the whole story. But let's talk about the pros first. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. That's about as good as it gets. They followed men for 12 weeks, used real measurements, and actually looked at hair, not just hormones. Now, that's a big factor, but there were some limitations. First, this was a small study. We're talking about 38 men who actually completed it. That's not huge. It's not even large by any stretch of the imagination. Second, these were younger men, ages 18 to 40. So we don't know if the same thing applies to older individuals or to women. And third, it was only 12 weeks long. And hair loss isn't always a 12-week process. Sometimes it plays out over months or even years. And maybe the biggest limitation, they didn't account for genetics. And when it comes to hair loss, genetics is a huge factor. And if you're predisposed, that matters a lot more than whether or not you're taking creatine and happen to experience some hair loss. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, because if you've been following this topic, you've probably heard about an older study from 2009, which suggested creatine might increase DHT, but it was short, it used a loading phase, and those findings have never really been consistently replicated. And this newer study, it didn't show that effect either. And one more thing that we need to talk about, and this is important for the sake of credibility. At the end of this paper, there were some disclosed relationships. Some of the authors reported ties to supplement companies or the sports nutrition industry. Now, that doesn't invalidate the study, but it does mean that the results should be viewed through a lens of that awareness. So where does this leave us? Well, here's my takeaway, especially if you're over 50. Right now, there's no strong evidence that creatine actually causes hair loss. This study actually suggests it does not, but we still don't have long-term data. We don't have data in older populations. And we don't fully understand how this all plays out in people who are genetically prone to hair loss. So if you're sitting there thinking, should I take creatine? Should I not? Here's how I see it. If you're healthy and using standard research doses, creatine is one of the most studied supplements in sports nutrition. And this concern about hair loss, based on what we know today, is probably somewhat overstated. But if you're already noticing hair thinning or you've got a strong family history, then it's certainly reasonable to pay attention, especially if this is a concern for you. Not a cause for panic, but just something to pay attention to. And let me just say this, because I know some of you have to be thinking, hey doc, I know that's easy for you to say, and yeah, that's fair, but I didn't lose my hair because of creatine. I lost it because of genetics, time, and the realization that fretting over it during the best years of my life was a lot of wasted energy and ultimately a losing battle. And at the end of the day, this comes down to something I say a lot on this channel. None of this is medical advice, so talk to your doctor if you have concerns about supplementation or any medical issues you might be experiencing. If you've had a personal experience with creatine, good or bad, drop it down in the comments. I read those. They help guide what we talk about next. And if you didn't catch this last video on creatine and blood sugar, YouTube is serving it up next. As always, thank you so much for watching. And please share this video with someone you feel would benefit from watching it as well. Take care of yourself, stay strong, and I will see you in the next video.